horror genre to me is kind of like the most pure form of what I would describe as kind of like the human condition. Because I think when you put people under the most dire circumstances or extreme circumstances, is when you see, yeah, the human condition play out in its most extreme form.
Hello, everyone. Talal Azim here from Popcorn and Soda, and I'm very excited today to be discussing the film Hunting Matthew Nichols, a horror thriller slash pseudo documentary in which 2 decades after her brother mysteriously disappears in a secluded forest on Vancouver Island, a documentary filmmaker sets out to solve his missing persons case. We're joined today by the directors, producers, and one of the stars of the film, Markian Tarasiuk. Markian, it's a pleasure having you on the show today, brother. How are you doing?
I'm doing really, really well. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. And first things first, congrats on the release of the film throughout various different festivals in North America. How do you feel about the audiences finally getting a chance to watch this movie?
I love that the audience is finally, able to see this film. And it's one of these things because I've been working on this movie for, I think it's about 4 years now. So I feel like, Sean and I, the writer, Sean Oliver, we've been in this bubble of this story and this movie for so long. Thinking about so many, aspects of it, and then the writing of it to the development to the actual filming of it, that being able to share with everybody has been super, super gratifying. And the audiences seem to love it so far, and being able to sit at the back of the theater, which I always do, and kind of slowly see the effect that the movie has on the audience and the surprises and the turns in the form of the movie has been really, really special, because it's like I'm kind of watching it and being like, all right, the thing that I wanted to make has come true and people seem to enjoy it.
That's awesome. And hey, I've had the chance to watch the movie. I've actually seen it a couple of times now, and I really
What?
enjoyed it, man.
Uh,
It's one of those hidden gems for me for this year that just kind of pops up on your radar out of nowhere, and then you're just like, "Whoa, what is this?" And for me, like horror is my absolute favorite genre. And the found footage movies are like my
yeah.
favorite subcategory within it. I literally have probably seen every single found footage movie, so that's why when I
Yes.
watch this, I'm like, "Wow, this is unique." So before we
Thank you.
deep dive into the movie, what does the horror genre mean to you?
Oh man, the horror genre to me is kind of like the most pure form of what I would describe as kind of like the human condition. Because I think when you put people under the most dire circumstances or extreme circumstances, is when you see, yeah, the human condition play out in its most extreme forms. It's where there's heroes made, there's villains made, when you kind of put characters or people under a pressure cooker. And I think that kind of like is also in real life as well too, of like in extreme circumstances, you kind of see the best and the worst in people. And that's horror to me. So it's kind of the most pure form of watching, um, you know, character and humans play out under those conditions, which I think is super interesting from storytelling perspectives, from characters' perspective. So that's what it kind of means to me. And it also offers the most freedom because you can really do anything in horror. And I think that Hunting Matthew Nichols is part of that. Of like, we just wanted to go off the deep end with this format, that is, a true crime format that's so popular right now, that we wanted to just go and deviate really, really far from that. And horror allows you to do that because the audience gets to accept the rules that you make. As opposed to a lot of different genres where the rules are very much set in stone. And when you deviate from them, things start not to make sense. Or that's not the case because you can go in any direction and it gives you a lot of freedom as a filmmaker.
What were some of your favorite horror movies growing up that just influenced your love of the genre?
Well, I think it's obvious here in Hunting Matthew Nichols. You mentioned the found footage stuff. That was super influential to me. I talk about, and we talk about in this movie is the Blair Witch Project, which is the seminal film of the genre, that kind of paved the way for the rest of it. But I was 6 years old when that came out, so I wasn't really tapped into Blair Witch right when it was coming out. I kind of missed that train due to my age. So the one I was really, really tapped into, and I remember being on E-Bombs World for the marketing campaign was Paranormal Activity. And I remember them running a campaign on E-Bombs World with all these creepy clips, and I was so engulfed in this marketing campaign for that movie. And then I went to the theater, saw the movie, I loved it. And the thing is, like, I knew it was fake the whole time, or like, but there was something about them playing with a home video camera that made it get under my skin more than I think any other horror movie at that point. Another one, which is funny, is and there's influences in the movie in Hunting Matthew Nichols, is The Ring, as well too. I was terrified of that movie because I thought that when I watched that movie, that would mean that Samara comes out of the television for me to because I'm cursed, right? So, and that had to do with VHS video screens, and around that time in the mid 2000s, that was really influential to me, and is obviously apparent in Hunting Matthew Nichols.
I love that, man. And hearing E-Bomb's World was not on my bingo card for today. I swear I probably haven't heard that in over like a decade, which is wild, man. This is just some millennial talk here for the two of us here. The Blair Witch Project. I watched it when I was way too young, and I think I did watch it when it originally came out. When I don't know who let me watch it, but I watched a VHS version of it at home, and those movies stick with you. And I think like horror is, like you said, that one genre that anyone, and it's for everyone as well, right? It's like human nature is so different in terms of what's scary for one person may not be for other. But I think the reality of films where we kind of ground certain things, those are the ones that really stick out. So shifting right to Hunting Matthew Nichols, can you walk me through the idea of this film and what you and the team wanted the DNA of this film to be?
It's a great question. The idea originally came from when I was watching a true crime documentary on Netflix, and it was a crazy story. I forget which one it is, and but it was crazy, and it was so nuts that I had to Google it during watching it, and I found out really, really quickly once I Googled it that a lot of the interview subjects, the people came out against the movie, and they came out against the way that they were edited and portrayed in the documentary, and that the documentarians had taken a really, really extreme angle on it for entertainment value. Basically, they made the most exciting storyline possible out of nothing, really. And I felt a little duped as an audience member, and I was like, oh, well, now this whole documentary, I kind of wasted my time, and none of it's really real, and that's a bummer. But a light bulb moment came out of that when I was thinking about it, because I was like, that could have been completely made up, and I never would have known the difference. And I was like, well, why don't I just make one up from the start? And that would be exciting because I know the form, because I've seen them all. It's very cliched, all of these true crime documentaries at this point for me. They're mostly all the same. And then I was like, okay, what's the most exciting thing that can happen in a documentary? Is you come face to face with a monster or a killer, or you find out who did it or the crime, right? So with that all in mind, that's when I went to developing the movie, and that was kind of my influence. And the biggest one watching was Murder on Middle Beach. It's an HBO documentary series. So we used the form and the content because I found that the most interesting documentaries to me were the ones that kind of switch halfway through onto the people who are actually filming the documentary. The most recent one is Chimp Crazy on HBO, another one where halfway through that documentary, the cameras switch to the people involved. Same with the Jinx. It switches to the people involved because you're now active in a real-time investigation or scenario. And watching that play out in real time is way more interesting than just recollecting the entire documentary as it's happened in the past, or people just talking about in the past. And that gives you forward action, right, from a narrative standpoint. So that's one side of the question to your question, which is like that's how I kind of came up with the format and the story. And I wanted to set it in Vancouver Island on purpose, which is I've lived in Vancouver for a decade at this point. But all that being said, I really wanted to make Hunting Matthew Nichols unique and to follow a lot of feature film rules, which is the way it looks, the way it sounds, and the way the character development happens is very much what I would just consider traditional feature narrative and character-centric storyline. So I wanted to blend both of this, the found footage, the documentary aspect, but really take elements of feature films and kind of blend it all together into what you see now. And as like an example is like I was talking with my composers, and I was like, in the film there has to be motifs. I want the score to feel like a feature film. Tara has her theme, Matthew has his theme, the forest has his their theme, and the Legend of Roy Mackenzie has themes, which you don't really see in found footage movies. You don't see it
Yeah.
in documentaries. And so those are like little underbelly things that I can, and get more in depth about other things that I was like, the DNA of the movie still wants to be a feature film, but we're using all of this stuff over here. And hopefully that's a very confusing watch for the audience and a fun one. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like a cocktail of different types of films all into one. Like you said, the documentary features, it's got the found footage element, the conventional movie elements in it. I think that kind of just blended all really well. And for me personally, what I really enjoyed about the movie is that it has all these different elements. And personally, I think the three things that work the most is like it's a smart movie, it's very
Thank you.
self-aware, and it's very beautifully shot. And horror and especially found footage movies, they can be very lazy sometimes, right? And like you
Agreed.
said, the
Yeah.
cliches are all there. All the tropes in every movie, you can kind of
The
sense them
shaky
nowadays.
cams. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, right? And the movie is grounded as much as it can be in reality, as much as it can, right? In
Yes.
the sense of still having that horror element in it. So let's talk about the filmmaking of the movie because I loved how this movie shot. Because in the movie,
Thank
there's
you.
a group of filmmakers, and I feel like the filmmaking really reflects how cameras, lighting, everything is in today's standard. So, what was the approach of filming it with such beautiful shots throughout this movie?
Thanks for saying that. And it's a huge shout out to my cinematographer Justin Sebastian. He really. I explained my vision to him. I just told him kind of like what I just said was like I don't want it to feel like another found footage movie. And so we took a lot of time and meticulously created our look and our feel. We did camera tests. We created a specific custom LUT that we built out to have on the monitors on the day because I wanted to see what the actual finished product was going to look like on the day. I didn't want to just depend on log video and then hope that everything is good. So we took a lot of time, weeks and weeks of prep to nail down the exact look and feel of the film in the terms of the lighting. And so then we ended up like the FX9, the Sony FX9 is what we used for the majority of it. Now, the reason we used FX9 is because it's the only cinematic camera that uses or has the ability to do autofocus because we didn't want a focus puller. We still wanted to do the zoom in, zoom out like you see in documentaries, but we
Right.
needed that cinematic feel and look to it. And the FX9 is the only camera on the market that has that ability. That's still a cinema camera. And then for the forest stuff at the end, we used FX3s. So same line and same look and same color profile as the FX9s, but smaller camera and more compact and not as cinematic. It changes there at the end. But that was a huge conversation was to make it feel like a feature film. And so the trick became it was a constant conversation of we did have gaffers and we had our LX team and there was a lot of lights and setup and thought put into all of the shots, but we had to make it look like as if we didn't put in that effort, like we didn't put in all of that stuff. We wanted to make it look natural, but beautiful. So it became this kind of like thing where we'd stand around and have a conversation about, well, does it look too good? Is this too flashy in terms of or indie film looking kind of stuff? And so there'd be moments where we'd have to pare it back, and because it just kind of looked too good in a lot of things, and so it became that balance that I think you see on the camera or on screen. And but I always told Justin, I said, hey, I want at the very least when somebody watches this movie to be easy on the eyes, some beautiful shots, because again, that's what separates this movie, I think, from a lot of found footage is just that time and care that we put into all of the shots and the lighting to make sure that our tone of the film is totally cohesive. And yeah, it's still a pleasure to watch at the end of the day.
It's fascinating because we've been speaking of our love of horror movies, and what I think this movie does so smart, and just a big shout out to you and the team, is you guys actually incorporate like the Blair Witch Project directly into this film.
Yeah.
And again, half of the found footage films, they kind of tiptoe around that, but you guys made that part of the film. And I so dug that part because I feel like without it, it may have felt like an elephant in the room with, the legend of
Yeah.
Roy McKenzie and the woods and all of that. So
Yeah.
I'm just fascinated. I know you mentioned earlier you wanted to set the movie in Vancouver. It's been home base for you for over a decade. Was that always the case where you guys wanted to have it in this Black Bear Forest, have it set on the island, or was there other ideas that you guys maybe had that you guys messed around with?
No, actually, from the start, it was always Vancouver Island. And, it was one of these things where we would pitch this project to studios and production companies, and pretty much the majority of them would tell us to set it in the States, right? Because the American audiences want American locations and blah, 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 blah. And I stood by it the entire time that I said, no, it's got to be on Vancouver Island. For a few reasons. I think for the reason of that, I've never seen Vancouver Island used in a horror setting yet, in a film. And it's a very haunting place in terms of like its forest, its location, its remoteness. It's desolate, it's expansive, it's creepy, it's beautiful. It's all of these things. It's kind of like we were just talking about. The movie itself is a blend of genres and styles. And to me, the Force is that same thing. It's like you can be as scared as mystified of the Force in the Pacific Northwest. So that to me was always part of, again, about the DNA of this movie, and the look and feel of it, the dank, rain and mist and water. It's almost claustrophobic to a certain point. And I wanted that feeling to be present in the movie as a character in itself. Um, so that was always my angle with the movie. We've always had it as set on Vancouver Island. There's also a lot of creepy stories that the island is known as like the most haunted place geographically in Canada, specifically Victoria is known as like the most haunted city in Canada. So it's already got those things supporting it from a lore standpoint, or from, cult communities or witches. That stuff is always present there. So that was always there for us, and I stuck by my guns, and I'm glad I did because I love that location. And to me, other than being a homage to a lot of genre films and found footage films, this is also a homage to the island for me a little bit. And I don't know, we'll see once people on the island watch the movie how they feel about it. But to me, it is a little bit of a love letter to the beauty of Vancouver Island. Yeah.
Oh, I love it, man. It's so unapologetically Canadian. So, and I respect that because it's people come to like Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, and they pretty much shoot New York, LA, or whatever else in these
Yeah.
locations. So it's cool
Yeah.
to see a movie that actually represents the actual place where it's being shot. So I love that.
I
Now,
agree.
like one of the strong points of the movie is the cast, and of course, led by Miranda McDougall, yourself, the multiple great supporting performances throughout the film. The chemistry I think that all of you have is what makes this film, especially yours and Miranda's, a true highlight for me. So, can you
Thank
talk
you.
about working alongside with her and specifically the larger supporting cast as well?
Yeah. I mean, it was a dream cast. I was shocked. I don't know if shocked is the right word, or like surprised that the buy-in. I was just taken aback by the buy-in by my cast. And when I say buy-in, when you're a director, it's your job to get your cast, your crew, everybody to buy into a vision, to buy
Yeah.
into a style, to buy in. And the more they buy in, the more believable it is, the more they care, and the better movie you get at the end of the day. And everybody from the top down, on the call sheet was just so into this idea and had so many ideas and about the characters, about the angles and questions. And we would have like these discussions usually before every scene where we would sit down over a coffee or tea and we just talk about it. And this kind of became a bit of a ritual for us where we would talk about what the needs and the wants were of the characters. And we would do that because I would encourage all of the cast members to improvise and improvise in terms of the dialogue, improvise in terms of blocking. I said, whatever you want to do, go for it, because the more natural it is, the more that your own being says these words or moves around the space, the more natural it's going to come off on the screen, and that was always my goal. So I'd say about 25% of the movie is improvised dialogue, and in terms of like Miranda, she is a rock star and she's a star. Truly, I was so lucky to find her. We auditioned her, and I had a callback where I tried to. My job in the callback was because I knew I was in the movie at that point as a character, because which was not always the case. I didn't do it for vanity reasons. We actually did it for narrative purposes, which I think a lot of actors do. They just plop themselves in their own movies and like, I'm a star. That really wasn't the case here. I do promise, like I was in the movie for a very specific reason, plot device wise, and also marketing device wise. But anyways, we had this callback, and I tried my best to throw Miranda off in the callback, improvising, and really deviated, and to see how she would react. Of like, if I throw these lines at her or I throw these things, how is she going to react and defend her argument? Which is always my position as the director. I said, "What's your argument? Stick to your argument, and win the argument over me." And she did. She won. She kicked my ass, and I was so thrilled that she did, because I was like, this is the type of actress I need in this role, who is unapologetic, who will go to the ends of the earth in terms of character. And she did, and she was such a trooper. So, and then our chemistry just kind of built, but it was also instantaneous, because I felt that in the audition that just we were going to get along. And that was the case. And then the same thing with Christine Wills, who plays Pam. She just knocked it out of the park. And her father was actually an RCMP officer on the island. So she knew that character through and through, because her father growing up was that character. So that was like a kismet thing. And then I've known Ryan, the cameraman, has been a friend and colleague for about a decade as well too. So him and I already had this thing going on that we knew, and he knew the story because he helped me shoot the proof of concept. So like all of these elements just seemed to come together with everybody in the cast, and it just all worked. And I knew it was going to work from day one. And I say that a bit with like ego or like, lack of. I just knew like from day one I was in a good position as a director with these actors. Yeah.
I love that. And like you just nailed it there. I feel like Miranda's performance, she was such a rock star in this movie. That's like the perfect word for it. Just had so many shades of like Heather from the Blair Witch Project, all sorts of different things. She was like literally the rock in terms of carrying the movie forward. And you played such a great supporting role to kind of supplement her, to get her through her journey in the film. So now, without getting into spoilers, of course, in horror movies, more than anything, I feel like the ending of a movie kind of like makes or breaks the entire movie. We've all seen amazing horror movies, which the ending just destroys it. And then we've seen vice versa, where the movie maybe not have been that great, and then the ending kind of works. It's like one of those unforgiving genres in that sense. Now, for me, I thought it was a bold ending. Now, I'm fascinated from a filmmaker's perspective. So for you personally, did you guys craft the ending to service the story? Or was it working in reverse, in which you first create the ending and then you have to kind of find a story that services that ending?
That's a really great question. Honestly, we had the idea about the ending in generalities first, which was shit goes off the wall. That's kind of where we started. And we spent the majority of our development on getting there. So we knew the ending was going to go crazy. But we actually did, me and Sean spent the majority crafting how do we get there for it to all kind of like justify, make sense, and feel natural all at the same time. It's a really hard thing to do in this format. And then we wrote the ending last, actually. So once we figured out over here, we then went to the end. But we knew that this is where we're going to end, right? And we knew what was going to happen to Tara and me. It was always like, okay, this is where we go. We know the Z. Let's go back to A and now work it up. But the Z was very, very vague, very vague. And then we built it off there. And then I'm sure you're also like, as a viewer, you have so many questions about that ending. And that was purposeful. I think there's a lot of discussions that will happen about our movie when you leave. I would rather you leave the theater or leave a screening and have an argument with your friend about what that ending meant and what it means, or your partner, and you can discuss it because that's more exciting. I have all the answers to all those things. And they're not just like thrown at the wall in terms of us being like, haha, I just gotcha. No, the decisions made at the end are all very purposeful, but we're trying to set ourselves up for a sequel. So we're trying to get people to ask those questions, to demand those answers, because we will get into it. And there is a lot of lore that we have that really goes into a lot of things detail wise, especially that we have in our first movie that maybe a lot of people will gloss over and not pick up on. But there are little clues as to what's coming, hopefully for Hunting 2 one day.
Right on, man. Right on. And I think you nailed it there. With the movies that really stick with you are the ones where you can have those discussions afterwards, where it opens that dialogue of what you think may have happened. You kind of have different perspectives on it, because that's like the beauty of cinema, right? It's all subjective. Everyone kind of views it different. So I love that. And especially about
Yeah.
this film. Like I said, that ending was bold. It was a very bold
Yeah,
ending.
what
Like I said,
one of my
shit hits the fan.
shit hits the fan, and one of my favorite things is talking to audience members after, and they say, "What happened? What are those?" And I say, "What do you think?" And the interpretations that I have seen and heard from audience members are some of the most exciting things as a filmmaker for me to hear, like what I didn't maybe imply or think of. Audience members are taking from that ending, and they are interpreting that, oh, it meant this, it meant this. And I was like, that's amazing. The fact that you have created your own narrative as an audience member, which actually differs from mine as a filmmaker, is exciting in of itself. And I just have a huge smile on my face, because I'm like, if that's what it means to you as an audience member, and that's what you get to take home, I think that's just as valuable as me telling you as a director, or
Totally.
me, like, having my angle of it and being absolute with my answer. I don't find that as exciting as being able to interpret it yourself and hold that truth of what that means for you as an audience member. I think it's a really valuable thing.
Love it. And we kind of spoke earlier that the film's now played at multiple festivals all over North America. So for you, Marky, what do you find and what do you hope is the future for Hunting Matthew Nichols? Would you like to see this like on a streaming platform, a limited theatrical release potentially? Because I feel like the world needs to see this movie, and more eyes need to get on this movie, because it's such a great movie, man.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I really want it, to get out to the masses, because I just think, yeah, I'm very proud of it. So thanks for saying that. In my ideal world, I would love this to have a limited theatrical release and then go onto a major streamer. I mean, that's everybody's dream. So it's a little cliched to say that. But the reason I want the theatrical release is because I've watched the movie in small settings. I've watched it in the theaters in up to a 500-seat theater, which was Blood in the Snow, and there's a different feeling with our film when you experience it communally. And when I've been in those theaters, you get to see the audience shift, change, get uncomfortable, and grab onto each other's, thighs, and the movement and the breath of the room changes. And I love that about going to the cinema and being able to experience this movie communally as everybody starts to figure out, wait a minute, with this whole film is kind of always I'm like, when did you clue in to what was happening? And it's different for everybody. That's the most powerful thing for me when this movie really, really hits, is with an audience. And so I really hope it does get its limited release into theaters, so people who want to have that opportunity do, to see it with their friends and be scared together. But aside from that, everybody watches true crime documentaries on streaming services.
Right.
So at the same time, I'd love for it to be in the cinema for that reason, but I'd also love it to land on somewhere like Netflix or Hulu, because that's where people are taking in this sort of, media. And I think that's where the most eyeballs will be for us at the end of the day. So having a mixture of both, I think, would be really beneficial.
Right on. And lastly, like throughout our conversation, man, like the one single thread has been our mutual love of horror. And I can just sense your love of the genre just from speaking to you. So have you satisfied your horror cravings? Or I know you kind of mentioned there's a whole lore of Roy McKenzie, the world that you guys built in this. we potentially see more from you in the future, whether it's in this universe or a whole new original horror IP altogether?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like we are focusing on hunting Matthew Nichols right now, and I am, and I'd love to do, our sequel. I would the first time I will speak of it, it's called, Hunting Tara Nichols on here. So this hunting world and this franchise that we're trying to build out with, I think, really exciting docu stories is where I do want to focus on. I have so many ideas for these types of mockumentary type horror movies that, again, to me it's always got to push the boundaries. It's got to raise the bar. I don't want to create just other found footage movies that have been done before, and I think taking this, and I hope Hunting Matthew Nichols kind of does raise that bar. That was my goal a little bit on the found footage genre, to make it what I call prestige documentaries, which are the Netflix styles, and turn those into horror and have bigger budgets on these things. So that's one, route that I want to go down. But I also do have another horror script that's making its rounds out right now that um, it's really fun, and it's I've done a lot of work as an actor in the Hallmark space. So it's basically a Hallmark horror, is how I describe it. So that's also fun, and it blends a ton of genres. And I just want to be known as somebody, when you come into the theater or you watch one of my movies, you really don't know what to expect. And I love genre blending. I love subverting expectations of the audience. I keep on talking about one of my favorite movies the last 5 years has been Barbarian, because
Yeah.
it changed three times. And I, as an audience member, hadn't seen that, where the style, the tone, and where this movie went completely 180. And I was more engaged because of it. And a lot of people will tell you on the studio side or production side of, stick to one genre. It sells over here. You just know it's going to sell over here, and it sells internationally, and they'll give you these answers. And to me, I'm like, that's boring as hell. I don't think I need to stay in a lane as a filmmaker, or a horror person. You can chop and mix like a salad these things together, and that's more exciting to me. So I would say that is kind of my focus as a filmmaker going forward. Is, if you see my name on a poster, hopefully you don't know what's coming.
Markian, congrats on the film, brother. Such a
Thank you.
great movie. I love how Canadian it is. I love how it's a love letter to horror filmmaking, and just more importantly, in a crowded genre of found footage horror movies. It stand on its own, and
Thank
that's
you.
probably the biggest compliment that I can give it, because it's got its own identity. And I think more filmmakers need to take some notes from a movie like this, because I think it's such a great, fun, exciting, thrilling, nerve wracking, the anticipation, scary AF at points as well.
Yeah.
It's just a perfect cocktail, man. So I wish you all the best with the future of Hunting Matthew Nichols. I look forward to the future of hopefully getting to see Hunting Tara Nichols. And more than anything, I really appreciate your time today, man.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate the kind words and you having me on today.